It's a very powerful speech. Joining me now is Australia, Israel and Jewish Affairs Council Executive Manager Joel Burney. Joel, I presume you had a look at what Netanyahu had to say there in the Congress. It was a very powerful speech, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a significant speech by Prime Minister Netanyahu, around 15 minutes long, a number of standing ovations, and he covered some critical points, not just in terms of the bilateral relationship between the United States and Israel, but also about the trajectory of where we're heading as a global community. What you've seen in the protests in Washington during Prime Minister's visit, including the tearing down and burning of the American flag and the hoisting of the Hamas flag in downtown Washington, is reminiscent of what we've seen on the streets of our cities since the terrible events of October 7. Now, I do note, I was watching Annalise in your previous package, who's doing fantastic work in Washington. But what she said about those local traders and the impact that these movements, these protest movements have on the life of individual and small business owners, even here in Australia, has been terrible. And I think that the public has had a gutful of it.
Joel, I mean, how concerned are you when you see 50 Democrats, including Nancy Pelosi and others, did not stay in the chamber? They boycotted that speech. Are you worried about what might happen if someone like Kamala Harris, who's a very left-leaning Democrat, were to win the election, if she was the new US president? I mean, what would the relationship, do you believe, with Israel be like?
Well, I wouldn't want to gloss over it, but I also wouldn't blow it out of proportion either. So the fact that some notable Democrats were not in the chamber was similar to Netanyahu's previous speech in Congress about 8 or 9 years ago, when a similar amount were also not in the chamber. But then conversely, the vast majority of both the House and the Senate were there. And he had, as I said before, he had multiple standing ovations to the point that he was discussing. Just briefly in terms of the vice president. So obviously she wasn't in the chamber either. But I do note that the Prime Minister will be meeting with the vice president tomorrow, our time, today, American time, on Thursday. And I will say this, in terms of concerns about her being the presumptive nominee, in contrast to what's currently going on inside the Biden administration, my estimation is that for the majority of it, she will try and stick close to what the administration has done over the past 3.5 years. But the one area of concern that I have is that President Biden had a very, very long, decades-long relationship with the state of Israel. That's very, very deep, very, very serious, and very, very important personally to the president. And that has been illustrated in many of the things that he's done recently post-October 7. Kamala Harris does not have that established history like President Biden has. So if you had to point on one of those potential weaknesses, I would point to that. But I think the time will tell to see what positions the vice president is going to take over the next 6 months.
Joel, bringing it back home, I was very puzzled this morning to read that Foreign Minister Penny Wong, on radio of all things, announced sanctions on a number of Israeli settlers over violence against Palestinians in the West Bank. And when speaking on the sanctions, Minister Wong said, quote, "The Albanese government has been firm and consistent that Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories are illegal under international law and a significant obstacle to peace." What do you make of what the Albanese government is doing here?
So I take two clear issues with the announcement earlier on today and the reasons for it. So the first is the announcement of the sanctions themselves. So settler violence is an issue. My organisation has called it out from time to time when the settlers have done some bad things to Palestinians inside the West Bank. However, it needs to be noted that Israel is a very strong and vibrant liberal democracy that has an impeccably strong and independent judiciary, and the country is ruled and its citizens are ruled by a very strong rule of law. So the ability of Israel to investigate, arrest and prosecute these people is significant, and it should be left to a liberal democracy like Israel to do so independently of comment from other countries, including allies like Australia. The second thing is that this idea that it is such a significant obstacle to peace. Now, to be frank, there are many obstacles to peace, many larger obstacles, including the alleged partner for peace in the Palestinian Authority, which I will note is paying stipends to the terrorists that came into Israel on October 7. These are the real impediments to peace. Palestinian rejectionism of the multiple offers for peace and for two states that have been offered in the past. These are notable obstacles to peace. So I think that the government's preoccupation with focusing singularly on Israel is a common trait of this government. It's continued its realignment of a very long-standing and bipartisan bilateral relationship between Australia and Israel. And I do fear that in the last 9 or so months of this government, that realignment will continue to be against Israel.
Joel Burney, great to catch up. Thank you very much for helping us out tonight. Now, all right.